And ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, before I begin what I normally do to start the TV courtroom show, let me just say this. This program is part of PhillyCAM's People Power Media Fest, our annual month-long celebration of community media and our membership. That's you. This year, we are focused on sharing the ways our media can be a form of community care. Catch conversations, workshops, and special programming focused on ways storytelling cultivates care. Tune in to be a part of the fest on cable, radio, and online. For more information, you can visit ppmfest.org. And having said that, let me say this again. This is TV Courtroom. And check this out. As the name indicates, this is attorney Michael Cord, aka Michael X, aka the angriest black man in America. There's a number of things we want to get into today. We want to talk about Octavius Catto. You might say, well, why do you want to talk about Octavius Catto? Wasn't there just some event that took place a couple days ago? Isn't that over and done with? So why are you talking about it today? Well, there was an event that took place on the south side of City Hall on Monday, October 10, and it was right adjacent to the Octavius Catto statue. And again, it took place on Monday, October 10, but here we are talking about it 4 or 5 days later. Why? Because it's timely. I'll get to that in just a second. So one topic is Octavius Catto. The other is a horrific example of unchecked racist, classist, and political power, where real, live human beings are treated like guinea pigs, throwaway people, people who are too poor to pay bail after being accused of crimes, some falsely accused of crimes. We want to talk about what the city of Philadelphia did in conjunction with the University of Pennsylvania to experiment on human beings in a way that will literally blow your mind. Just some horrific stuff that went on for almost a quarter century. So those are the two topics. There's a third topic I might try to get into, assuming we have time. And correction, there's a third topic we'll definitely get into because I'm going to make time. It's tied into the Octavius Catto situation, but it's really a separate third topic, and it deals specifically with the upcoming election. And by the way, in connection with whether it's a primary election in May or a general election in November, I always write a list of endorsements in my column in the Philadelphia Tribune. And then I talk about those endorsements on my radio show. It's called Radio Courtroom on WURD 96.1 FM. And I do what I'm doing right now. I talk about my endorsements right here on TV Courtroom here at PhillyCAM. But I want to be clear. When I give my endorsement list, it is not necessarily the opinion of the Philadelphia Tribune, the opinion of WURD, or the opinion of PhillyCAM. This is just one opinion of one person who believes he has access to information that the community needs to be aware of. So again, this is not a reflection of the Tribune, not necessarily, not a reflection necessarily of WRD, and certainly not necessarily a reflection of PhillyCAM. Once again, it's just one angry black man's opinion based on thorough research that was done in connection with the upcoming election that will take place on Tuesday, November 8, 2022. Now, having said that, I'm encouraging folks to get your pens out, get your pads out, or for those who are younger, pull out your smartphones and just start either recording or jotting some stuff down because this is critically important. So again, here's the agenda. We're going to talk about the Octavius Catto event that took place a few days ago, but is still relevant. And then I'm going to jump right into the election coming up on November 8th. That'll be the second topic because that goes hand in hand with the first one. And then the third one, I'm going to spend a substantial amount of time talking about the city of Philadelphia and the University of Pennsylvania treating human beings as guinea pigs. And let me just say this, I'm a vegan, so I believe that all sentient creatures need to be respected. Sentient simply means you feel like humans feel. You have emotions, you have aspirations, but more important, you feel pain. You experience terror. All those kind of things that you feel when you're happy or sad, that's what chickens feel. That's what cows feel. That's what hogs feel. That's what fish feel. That's what any living creature feels. And I don't want to get on my vegan soapbox right now, but many of you probably have dogs, puppies. Many of you probably have cats, kittens. Could you imagine somebody skinning your little puppy alive, butchering it, and then frying it up and serving it to you or to anybody else, your little puppy? Well, that same trauma that your little puppy would go through before being murdered is the same trauma that a cow goes through, that a pig goes through, that a chicken goes through, that a fish goes through. And I'm only saying that because I use the example of a guinea pig as if it's okay to take guinea pigs and experiment on them. It's not. Just like it's not a good thing to experiment on human beings or kittens or puppies or anything that experiences fear and that feels pain and that could undergo trauma. That's just my vegan soapbox thing right then and there. And by the way, since I'm on my vegan thing, let me just say this. I am an attorney, so I have to go to court. When I go to court, I got to wear a suit. And when I wear a suit, obviously I need a belt and shoes on. People say, well, how do you go to court stylish if you're a vegan? You can't wear that leather stuff. I'm like, you're right. But in 2022, there are so many even designer labels that sell vegan stuff. I got some really stylish. If I could stand up right now, I would show you my vegan belt. And without naming names, but in this case, I will. I have a Louis Vuitton fake leather belt on. I got fake leather shoes from Wheels of London. So there are items of clothing that you can wear that appear very stylish that don't require you to murder sentient creatures or that don't require you to pay for the murder of sentient creatures. Okay, that's my vegan thing for the day. Maybe next month or in a couple months, I'll focus the show on veganism. But I just wanted to touch on that because I'm going to be talking about human guinea pigs. And I should probably come up with a different phrasing because I don't want anybody to think that it's okay to experiment on any sentient creature. But having said that, let's start at the beginning. The beginning, one of three, remember: one, Octavius Catto; two, November 8 election; and three, the city's involvement in experimenting on human beings in some horrific, malicious ways. And you'll hear it all. Having said that, let's talk about Octavius Catto. Now, as we speak, it's Friday, October 14. 4 days ago on Monday, October 10th, there was an event that took place on the south side of City Hall. And if anybody has ever been to City Hall, at least in the last, 4 or 5 years or more, you know, there's a large statue of a man named Octavius Catto. And Octavius Catto is known for, I guess the best way to describe him to people who don't know who he was the Martin Luther King of his time. And of his time, we're talking about the 1870s. So here's the story of Octavius Catto. And his last name is spelled Catto. And a lot of people, for whatever reason, call him Catto or Catter or whatever. But his name is Octavius Catto. Cat as in feline, toe as in foot. And that's important because a lot of folks get it wrong. And that's like mispronouncing the name of Dr. Martin Luther King. You just can't do that. So the man's name is Octavius Valentine Catto. Now, again, if you don't know who he is, you know by me telling you he was the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King of his day. That kind of gives you an idea of what we're talking about. But let me talk about first the event that took place on Monday. A group of political activists decided to honor Octavius Catto on October 10. Those activists include, among others, I know I'm going to forget some names, there's the OV Catto Voter Empowerment Initiative. Just Google these things as I tell you about them, and you can definitely find them. So again, the organizers of Monday's event include, among others, the OV Catto, CATTO, the OV Catto Voter Empowerment Initiative. Another group is the Catto Voter Education Ministry, and that's in connection with the African Episcopal Church of St. Thomas. Big shout out to Dr. Gregory J. Allen. The third I want to mention is the City Commissioners of Philadelphia. That's the city agency that's responsible for making sure that elections run the way they're supposed to. There's Chairperson Lisa Dealey, there's member Seth Bluestein, and there's my good friend, City Commissioner Omar Sabir. They were the third entity involved in Monday's event. The fourth was the Black Clergy of Philadelphia and vicinity, represented by its president, Dr. Robert Collier. The fifth entity involved was the NAACP Philadelphia chapter, headed by President Catherine Hicks. Number 6 on the list, very important to me personally and educationally, the president of historic Cheney University. That's President Aaron Walton. Number 7, when you talk about cultural activism in Philadelphia, you can't have that conversation without talking about a sister by the name of Maisha Sullivan Angoza. Sister Maisha is the National Association of Kawaida Organizations president. And there were several others involved, including, I got to give credit where credit is due, Mayor Jim Kenney. Mayor Jim Kenney is the driving force that made that statue possible when it was installed back in 2017, even before he became mayor, as a city councilman, as a white city councilman. He was pushing the issue of recognizing Octavius Catto. So again, big shout out to Mayor Jim Kenney, previously city council person Jim Kenney. But I can't go through a list of folks to give credit to without giving credit to the one most responsible. That's a gentleman that many of you know by the name of Joe Certain. Joe Certain is known in the activist community as Jemadari. And Jemadari just means a military leader, a military officer. And he's the man who, with meticulous planning and organization, made Monday's event move like clockwork. He's the same man who in 1995 was responsible for sending more Black men to the Million Man March in DC, sending more Black men to the Million Man March than any other city in America. No disrespect to New York City, no disrespect to Chicago, Illinois, no disrespect to Detroit, Michigan, no disrespect to Compton, California. But of all the big cities in the country, the city that had the most or the largest number of Black men to attend the Million Man March in 1995 was Philadelphia, and that was thanks to the great organizer, Joe Certain, aka Jemadari. Now, having said all that, that's the organizers of Monday's event. They were all there, including yours truly, Attorney Michael Cord, aka Michael X, aka the angriest Black man in America. I was honored to be asked to be the MC of the event, and I enjoyed doing that. And I enjoyed doing it because I know who Octavius Catto is. Octavius Catto is a voting rights activist. And I say is, not was, because his legacy continues. And despite the fact that something tragic happened to him, he's resurrected anytime Black folks and other folks get together to support voting rights. So when you go through the checklist of who Octavius Catto is, you say voting rights crusader, you say civil rights and human rights activist, you say Union soldier recruiter. He made sure that the Union Army had enough black men to win the Civil War. He also was a student at my alma mater. You see a lot of stuff around me from Cheney University, where Cheney University was founded way back in 1837, 185 years ago. And some of the early classes included, you guessed it, Octavius Catto as a student. And not just a student, but he graduated as a valedictorian. And then he went on to become a math teacher at Cheney, an English teacher at Cheney, and a dean at Cheney. But I say Cheney, however, back then it wasn't called Cheney University. In fact, we weren't named Cheney University until 1983. Back then, in 1837, it opened up as the African Institute. And then a few months later, it morphed into a new name, the Institute for Colored Youth. And then as the years went on, we got different names: Cheney Teachers College, Cheney State College, and as of 1983, Cheney University. So Octavius Catto was one of the most famous figures in connection with Cheney's early history. But it's more than that. If you know anything about Negro Leagues baseball, you have to understand that Octavius Catto was the organizing forerunner for what became Negro Leagues baseball. So big shout out to Octavius Catto for that and for much more. Let me get into his background. His father had been enslaved in South Carolina. The family was from South Carolina. They then were able to get to Baltimore, Maryland. And in Baltimore, Octavius's father became an outspoken abolitionist. And because he was so outspoken, people told him, hey, you got to leave town. Otherwise, all the black folks here are going to be lynched. So they left Baltimore and ultimately began to reside right here in Philadelphia. As I pointed out, Octavius Catto became a student at the Institute for Colored Youth. That's what it was called when he was at Cheney. He graduated as the valedictorian. He then became an English professor and a math professor. And after that, he became the dean of male students. So he has a strong tie to what's now known as Cheney University. He was also, as I pointed out, a union recruiter. In other words, he was able to make sure that enough black men joined the Union Army so that the North could defeat the South, end slavery, and vanquish the Confederate States of America. That was the Southern Army. I also mentioned that he was an organizing forerunner to Negro Leagues baseball. Octavius Catto was a great baseball player, and he was able to recruit other great black baseball players. And they had a team called the Pythians. And the Pythians were so good, they said, hey, we're black, and we know it's the 1800s, late 1800s, 1860s, 1870s, but we're great baseball players. So why don't we join the Pennsylvania minor league organization where the white folks are playing? Because they can hit, we can hit. They can pitch, we can pitch. They can throw, we can throw. They can run, we can run. So it's all good. Let's join it. But the Pennsylvania chapter would not allow the Pythians and Octavius Catto to participate. He said, to hell with them. Let me jump over the Pennsylvania chapter and go straight to the national chapter. Unfortunately, the national chapter said the very same thing. We don't have a whole bunch of time to get into his whole baseball thing, but it's fascinating. Another thing that's fascinating is funny because I was talking about veganism and wearing stylish non-leather clothing. Octavius Catto was known to be extremely stylish back in his day. I mean, whatever the best shoes were, and the best pants, and the best belts, and the best shirts, and the best jackets, and the best coats, and the best hats, he had all that stuff. Stylish man, Octavius Catto. So you're talking about a great man, not only in form, the way he looked, but certainly in substance, who he was. He was also an officer in a group called the National Equal Rights League. That was pretty much like the NAACP of its day. And speaking of the NAACP, you know, the NAACP was instrumental in fighting the good fight for Rosa Parks. Well, Octavius Catto, right here in Philadelphia, fought against segregation in the Philadelphia transit system long before Sister Rosa Parks did her thing by refusing to move to the back of the bus. So essentially, you can say that Octavius Catto was Rosa Parks before Rosa Parks. And I mentioned that he fought against segregation on the Philadelphia transportation system, but he also segregated the Franklin Institute. The Franklin Institute back then said that black folks can't come in. So we're talking about the 1860s, 1870s, and Octavius Catto wasn't having it. He said, no, it's no way that I'm going to be a resident in Philadelphia. I'm going to be a graduate of then Institute for Colored Youth, which became Cheney University. I'm a legitimate scholar. I teach English. I teach math. I'm the dean of students. I should be worthy of going into the Franklin Institute. They said no, so he fought the good fight and won. And because of Octavius Catto, the Franklin Institute was segregated. I already talked to you about the baseball situation. There's a whole lot I want to share with you about that, but unfortunately, we don't have enough time right now. In fact, it's 3:52. We have to wrap things up around 4:27, 4:28. So maybe sometime in the future, I'll just focus a show on Octavius Catto and baseball. You might say, but what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is that I personally love baseball. I grew up playing baseball. I was in Little League. We won the city championship. I tried out for the Phillies minor league team. I went to Cheney. I'd like to think that I'm a stylish dresser. All that stuff I didn't realize at the time. I was following exactly in the footsteps of the great Octavius Catto. So at a certain point, maybe we will, in the future, get into the whole baseball thing and more about Octavius Catto. But let me talk to you about Octavius Catto in connection with this past Monday's event. Here's how it goes. We had this event on Monday, October 10, 2022. Why? Because exactly 151 years ago, from that date, 151 years ago, which would have been October 10, 1871, and back then that was election day, something horrific happened on October 10, 1871, election day here in Philadelphia. What happened was this: a block from the home of Octavius Catto, he lived near 8th and South. On that election day, October 10, 1871, about a block from Octavius Catto's home, a white man, Frank Kelly, who was extremely upset with Octavius Catto because Octavius Catto had been rallying black men to vote. Octavius Catto, and we're talking about October 10, 1871, that was a year after the 15th Amendment passed in 1870. And the 15th Amendment gave black men the right to vote. So here you got Octavius Catto here in Philly telling black men, hey, it's 1871. Did you know that last year, 1870, the 15th Amendment became the law of the land and that you, black man, have the right to vote? And he was recruiting blacks and he was rallying blacks and he was organizing blacks to vote. But a white man named Frank Kelly, about a block from Octavius Catto's home at 8th and South, fired 2 shots into Octavius Catto's body, killing him, correction, murdering him, correction, assassinating him. And despite the fact that 6 eyewitnesses testified as to Octavius Catto being shot in the back by Frank Kelly, a white cop testified for Frank Kelly, and Frank Kelly in 1877, 6 years later, was acquitted of all charges. And you might say that that was a sad ending, but it really wasn't, because if you consider Octavius Catto not just in a cultural way or a political way, but also in a kind of spiritual way, then you know that despite being quote unquote dead, you can be resurrected. And we in the African community, we believe through libation that Black people never really die. In other words, even if they cross onto the other side, they're resurrected each time we call their name out. So if you ever see Black folks get together at any type of event, a party, a meeting, a rally, whatever, and what they'll do, if they're conscious enough, they have a libation. And my organization, ATTAC, ATAC, Avenging the Ancestors Coalition. For more information about ATTAC, go to avengingtheancestors.com. That's our producer here, Roland, is just so thorough. As I was talking, I didn't even get it out of my mouth. He got it up on the screen. Go to avengingtheancestors.com and you'll find out more about ATTAC, ATAC, Avenging the Ancestors Coalition. And this organization, long story, but I'll give you the 30-second version. We came into existence in 2002 for the purpose of telling the story about George Washington enslaving Black men, boys, and girls at America's first White House at 6th and Market. And after 8 years of fighting from 2002 until December 15 of 2010, the grand opening of the first slavery memorial of its kind opened up right here in Philadelphia at 6th and Market. In fact, you can go down to 6th and Market today, any day. It's a 24/7, 365 open air museum. And even though it's exactly where America's first White House stood in 1790, and it's mentioned once you get there, but that mentioning is secondary. The primary attraction there is the slavery memorial. So if you want to know about the enslavement of Black folks at America's first White House, go down to 6th and Market or go to that website, avengingtheancestors.com. But anyway, we in that organization, ATTAC, ATAC, Avenging the Ancestors Coalition, we believe that every time you call out the names of the ancestors, they are resurrected in one form or another. So every time we hold any kind of event, meeting, activity, rally, whatever, we have a libation. We come together, we hold hands, somebody steps forward, usually but not always an elder. That person has water, that person has a plant, and those in the gathering will call out the names of those who go on to the other side. That person leading will pour water into the plant every time a name is mentioned, and then we get on with our program. It's not a matter of any quote unquote spookism. It's simply a matter of honoring and recognizing our ancestors. And that's exactly what we do with the libation. And when we held that event on Monday, October 10, 2022, Sister Maisha Sullivan Angoza held the libation before the event began and called out the names of those who've gone on to the other side: Nat Turner and Gabriel Prosser and Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman and so many others, Malcolm X and Dr. King and Reverend Leon Sullivan and so many others. And then the event began. So that event that took place on Monday, October 10, 2022, took place because we actually wanted to do a big event like that last year, because that would have been exactly 150 years from the date of Octavius Catto's death. But we were pretty much still in the midst of the whole COVID thing. So because of that, we couldn't gather in large numbers as we wanted. So we decided to cancel last year, and we did it this year. And it was an overwhelming success. A great event honoring Octavius Catto, but more important, continuing his work. And the point I made as the MC before each speaker was introduced, I said, hey, we're going to listen to each speaker, but remember this point that each speaker will make. It's great to talk about the life of Octavius Catto, but it's greater to continue his legacy. So imagine as Octavius Catto was dying on that South Philly sidewalk on election day, October 10, 1871, and he's looking at you, black man, you, black woman, you, black girl, you, black boy, and any other supporter of liberation for black people. He's looking at you and saying in his dying breath, here's the baton. It's the baton for voting rights. It's the baton for voting freedom. It's the baton for voting liberation. I'm handing it to you. Run with it. And that's what I'm doing now. I got that baton in my hand. I'm spreading it around and passing it to you. And that's where I get to the second topic of today's discussion. The second topic deals with the upcoming November 8, 2022 general election. And there's so much I want to share with you, but I don't have to. Why? Because you can read it all for yourself. Each Sunday, there's a column published that I write, and my column is based on liberating black folks. And in connection with liberating black folks, you can go to PhillyTrib.com. If you look on the screen, you'll see right beneath me, thanks to our producer Roland, PhillyTrib.com. Just Google PhillyTrib.com, type in CORD, COARD, type in endorsements, and the article will come up. And I call the column Freedom's Journal. In fact, if you know anything about Freedom's Journal, it was a publication during slavery that was designed to rally black folks and others to become abolitionists and to end slavery. So I got that baton from those folks, those publishers, those editors, those writers at Freedom's Journal and made it modern in my current Tribune column. And let me just summarize what I put in that article. But again, thanks to Roland, you can see it all for yourself. Simply go to PhillyTrib.com, type in CORD, COARD, type in endorsements, it'll come up. But here's how the article goes. In the article, I talk about how I'm not a big fan of the Democratic Party, but I've come to quote unquote love the Democratic Party because that's the only wall we have against the fascism of the Republicans. I don't have to love the Democrats in order to embrace the Democrats, in order to resist the Republican / the fascist. And here's how it goes. Let me just summarize this very quickly. In the article, I write the following. Malcolm X enlightened black people about what he called the ballot or the bullet. He said there's need for political change, there's a need for economic change, there's a need for social change, there's a need for revolution. That's all change is, revolution. There's a need for that. And Malcolm said that that change will come about either through the ballot or the bullet. Well, as I write in my article, Brother Malcolm wisely told us it was by the ballot or the bullet, because the bullet is definitely impractical and arguably unsavory. The only alternative is the ballot. Now, anybody who knows me knows that I'm not really into what this political system, this American system presents to us. I am a Pan-African socialist. And as a Pan-African socialist, I understand that the American capitalistic system and political system is abhorrent to me. But I always say, you got to play the hand you're dealt. And I was dealt the hand of being born in America, which has its own capitalist structure, has its own political system. I can yell and scream about it, but nothing would change. So in order to beat the system, I decided to use the system. So, in other words, as the article says, if real hardcore revolutionary change is not immediately attainable, then what's the next option? Well, what I write here is that the next best thing, at least currently, is electoral resistance to official fascism before it's too late. We all know what happened to Spain after Francisco Franco came to power. We all know what happened to Italy after Benito Mussolini came to power. We know what happened to Germany after Hitler came to power. That type of fascism is always within arm's reach unless we use our fist to punch it back and punch it way back and punch it down and knock it down and knock it out and ultimately kick it out. How do we do that? Do we do it through violence? Of course not. We do it through political power. And political power simply means this: you use the biggest stick available to you in order to beat the biggest monster that's trying to attack you. I would love it if the Socialist Party was in that position. I'd love it if the Rastafarian Party were in that position. I'd love it if the Communist Party was in that position. I'd love it if the Marijuana Party was in that position. I'd love it if the Green Party was in that position. But they're not. There's only one party right now, for good or for bad, that can stand up to the fascists in the Republican Party and beat it. And that's the Democratic Party. And let me read this because this is clear and very important in the article. Let me be clear. I do not love the Democratic Party. Its political ineptitude and its consistent milquetoast approach to confronting racism are infuriatingly frustrating. But I will enthusiastically vote Democratic democracy in order to defeat Republican fascism. You know, let me just read another part because it flows right into it. I tried to explain that to Black people back in 2016 when I endorsed Hillary Clinton over the man I call Mango Mussolini. You know who I'm talking about, also known as Orange Hitler. You know the guy, Donald Trump. I tried to explain this whole thing about using what you can to defeat the monster. And as a result, I endorsed Hillary Clinton over Mango Mussolini. But Black folks and others, y'all weren't listening. Many pro-Black activists and numerous pro-Black scholars, people like Dr. Eddie Glaude of Princeton University, who I love and respect, but he was just wrong when he bashed Hillary Clinton because he said that she wasn't progressive enough. And that's true. Hillary Clinton wasn't and isn't Angela Davis. Hillary Clinton wasn't and isn't Assata Shakur. Hillary Clinton does, I must admit, have a history of shaky political compromises, and some of her policies are downright conservative. And although all of that is true, she was not and is not a fascist like the Republicans. You might say, well, why do you keep saying fascist? I'm saying fascist because Republicans are fascist because their leader is a fascist. Donald Trump, aka Orange Hitler, aka Mango Mussolini. And you can tell he's a fascist because fascism is nothing but white Christian nationalism that takes power by force and crushes opposition and dissent. That's what it is. And that's what Orange Hitler, aka Mango Mussolini, is all about. How do we know that? We watched him create, promote, and exaggerate the January 6th attack on American democracy. We sat in front of our TVs, we sat in front of our phones, and we watched fascists almost take over this government and install Donald Trump as the king. And many of you said, well, Hillary ain't Angela Davis, and Hillary ain't Assata Shakur, and Hillary ain't progressive enough, but damn it, Hillary is not and was not a fascist. And as I pointed out in the article, the 2016 election was not about electing an Angela Davis or an Assata Shakur. It was about defeating fascism, and America blew it. We let the fascists come to power. And even apart from that, look at what's happening, even apart from that fascism and that whole blatant and systemic racism right in your face. There's also the sexism, correction, the misogyny. You see what the Supreme Court did recently when they overturned Roe versus Wade and basically said, women, you have no control over your body. In fact, that decision, that Roe versus Wade decision, and the decision to overturn Roe versus Wade, it wasn't about a woman's right to abort. It wasn't even about a woman's right to choose. It was about a human being controlling his, her, or their own body. I don't care whether it's a woman. I don't care whether it's a man. I don't care whether it's a transgender person. That individual should have autonomy over his, her, or their body. So when people say it was a women's right issue, no, it wasn't. When they say it was an abortion rights issue, no, it wasn't. It was a human rights issue. Men should be as outraged as women are about that decision. And that all comes from the right wing fascist Republicans. Voltaire once said, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. The Democrats are clearly not perfect, not even close to it, but they're good because they're the only weapon we have available to resist Republican fascism. And as I said earlier in the show, I talk about this kind of stuff on WRD. I write about it in the Tribune, and I'm doing it now at PhillyCAM. But these are all my own personal opinions. They do not necessarily reflect the position or opinions of the management and ownership of the Philadelphia Tribune, WURD Radio, or PhillyCAM. This is simply me, attorney Michael Cord, aka Michael X, aka the angriest black man in America, giving you his position based on his research. So I write the following. And remember, if you refuse to vote at all, you might say, well, I'm not voting for the Democrats or the Republicans. Well, by doing that, you're refusing to extinguish the fascist fire of republicanism. In other words, a non vote is actually a vote for fascism. And we know the election is coming up on November 8th, but just a couple days ago, early voting ballots became available. So I decided that, hey, Mike, instead of doing what I normally do, talking about this on the Sunday, on the weekend before election, that would be the Saturday and Sunday before the Tuesday, November 8th election. I said, hey, because there's early balloting going out in light of COVID and other stuff, a lot of folks are voting early. I said, let me do this thing twice. Let me do it now early, and then also do it on the weekend before the election of November 8th. Now, people might say, well, I hear you, but who are you? Why are you giving us your endorsements? Why should we listen to you? Well, let me read what I wrote here. Why me, you might ask? Who do I think I am, you might ask? Why should you accept my endorsements, you might ask? Well, here's why. To whom much is given, much is required. I've been a trial attorney for more than 25 years. I've been an adjunct college professor of Black history for about a decade and a half. I've been a cultural/political activist since my college days, over 40 years ago. I've been a radio and TV host for more than 15 years. I've been a newspaper columnist for 6 years. And I've been an African descendant for my entire life. That's one reason why you should listen to me, because I have access to the information. But here's another thing, which is very important. In the words of the great Congressperson Shirley Chisholm, I am unbought and unbossed. In other words, I don't request, I don't accept any money, any jobs, any grants, or any sort of personal benefits whatsoever from any candidate or any elected official. I just do what I do with these endorsements because I have access to information, resources, and I want to tell folks what's going on. Accordingly, prior to each primary and each general election, I use that information to compile my endorsement list. Why, you might ask? Well, here's why. Two reasons. One, literally hundreds of voters asked me to do. Number two, unlike the average voter, I have the time and the resources to thoroughly research the candidates. Consequently, I'm able to distinguish the good candidates from the bad ones, as well as the not so bad candidates from the truly bad ones. So here's how I break it down. I have a list of candidates I've endorsed, and the first on my list is Lieutenant Governor Fetterman. Well, if you know anything about John Fetterman, you know that there's some things that people are concerned about. There was an incident where he pulled out a gun on a black man when he was the mayor of Braddock here in Pennsylvania. And it's true, he did it. But let me read this part. And you can read it all for yourself when you read the article. I love Lieutenant Governor Fetterman's progressive stances regarding creating a living wage, supporting unions, saving the environment, protecting a woman's right to choose, respecting immigrant rights, and promoting restorative justice by ending mass incarceration, by issuing equitable pardons, and by providing for reentry programs. That's all great. But I hate what Fetterman did in 2013 to the black guy. All that progressive stuff I just laid out is good. In fact, it's great stuff. But you know what's not great? A white man who's not a cop, Fetterman, unnecessarily pulling a gun on an unarmed and innocent black man. And, in my opinion, then repeatedly lying about it. What he did was a potential Ahmaud Arbery type event. It could have been horrific. But here's what's different. One, Fetterman didn't fire a single shot. He pulled the gun, he aimed the gun, horrible, but he didn't fire a single shot. And also, the black guy who was the victim of this incident, guy by the name of Christopher Maieres, that guy has forgiven Fetterman. And not only that, that black guy also said he's voting for Fetterman because he knows that there's a big picture here. One, Fetterman's policies are great for black people. And two, Fetterman's opponent, whose name I won't even mention, is a fascist monster. So I'm not only voting for Fetterman, I'm endorsing Fetterman. And here's my endorsement list. U.S. Senate, John Fetterman. U.S. House, District 2, Brendan Boyle. District 3, Dwight Evans. District 5, Mary Gay Scanlon. For governor, Josh Shapiro. For lieutenant governor, Austin Davis. And there are 4 for city council. The first one, District 7, is Quetzi Lozada. District 9, Anthony Phillips. At large, Jimmy Harity. At large, Sharon Vaughn. And then there are 2 ballot questions. And usually I explain the ballot questions to people, but I'm not even going to go there with these 2 because for me, they're not really relevant. You can read them and decide for yourself once you read the article in the Philly Trib. Just go to phillytrib.com, type in CORD, COARD, type in endorsements, and all this stuff will come up. Also, check out my radio courtroom show on Saturday on WURD 96.1 FM. That's this Saturday. And I guess for the next couple Saturdays before the election on November 8th. Saturdays, WURD 96.1 FM from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. And also check us out at WURDradio.com. All right, in our final 10 minutes, let me talk about the, people call it the Holmesburg skin experiment testing, but it was bigger than that. It wasn't just Holmesburg, it was all 3 county prisons in Philadelphia. Yes, it was Holmesburg, there more than anywhere, House of Corrections and Detention Center. Here's the background. From 1951, that's 1951 until 1974. Technically 23 years, but rounded off, it's a quarter of a century, nearly 25 years. For 25 years, Philadelphia government, in the form of the mayor's office, city council, the courts, and the DA. If you know anything about government and civics, you're talking about the executive branch, the mayor, legislative branch, city council, judicial branch, the courts, as well as DA's office. For about a quarter of a century, All those entities allowed the University of Pennsylvania, in particular, Dr. Albert Kligman at the University of Pennsylvania, to engage in the horrific testing of predominantly black men. There were women also, and there were whites and Latinos also, but predominantly black men. And here's what they did with the testing. In fact, let me tell you, there's a book called Acres of Skin, written by Alan Hornblum. And if you want to know anything about what took place with those experiments, Alan Hornblum is the go-to guy. But along with Alan Hornblum is Adrian Jones Alston. Adrian Jones Alston is the force behind our group. And it's actually a 4-member group. There's Alan Hornblum, there's Adrian Jones Alston, there's Priscilla Morris, and there's yours truly, Michael Cord. And the 4 of us put together an organization called the Philadelphia Inmates Justice Coalition. And we reached out to other activists and reached out to scholars and reached out to organizations. So now we have an army. And once we began to talk about, hey, this was a horrible thing. And in fact, Alan and I came together about a year ago because I had been doing an article about the Tuskegee experiment. You know about the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, went on for 40 years from 1932 to 1972. Just a horrific thing where black men were mistreated and untreated. It's just horrific. 600 black men in poor Tuskegee, Alabama. Just a horrific thing where the federal government allowed many of these men to die excruciating deaths from allowing syphilis to run through their body untreated, allowing their wives to get syphilis, allowing their children to be born with congenital syphilis. To his credit, President Bill Clinton in 1997 said this was horrible. And on behalf of the federal government, we're apologizing for what we did to black folks in Tuskegee, Alabama, with the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. So based on that, Alan and I have been talking about that. And then Alan said, hey, there was something like that happened here in Philadelphia. And you can arguably make the claim that what happened here in Philly, as horrific as the Tuskegee syphilis experiment was, you can make the argument that what happened here in Philly with the inmates was worse. One, because with Tuskegee, it was a matter of black men who did have syphilis. Many of them did have it. They were untreated because the federal government and its doctors wanted to watch to see how syphilis can ravage the body if there's no treatment, despite the fact that penicillin was available. But the federal government kept penicillin away from those black men to watch them wither and die. So it was a matter of being untreated. And there were 600 black men who were part of this Tuskegee study. But when you talk about what happened in Philly, we know there were about 200 or 300 plaintiffs, but more than that, there were literally thousands of inmates from 1951 into 1974 who were subjected to this. In fact, there were so many that the reason why Alan Hornblum titled his book Acres of Skin, because when the evil Dr. Albert Kligman from University of Penn came to the prison and saw all these black men, all these Latino men, all these poor white men, all poor people, he saw them, he said, wow, there's acres of skin here. And with all this skin, I can do these experiments because this is literally a captive audience. And he engaged in some of the most horrific types of experiments you can imagine. They included, and it's much more than that, but they included, for example, excruciating skin patch test for herpes and things like that. There's cruel radioactive isotope studies. There was pernicious diet studies. There was sadistic chemical warfare experiments. I should say there were sadistic chemical warfare experiments and heinous mind-controlled experiments using LSD. Think about that. You got thousands of black men and brown men and poor men and women. And this horrific, nearly quarter of a century experimentation was financed by the likes of Johnson and Johnson, still around today, Dow Chemical, still around today, and 31 other entities, including the U.S. Army and the CIA, all headed by the evil Dr. Albert Kligman and University of Pennsylvania. And University of Pennsylvania finally just decided to apologize. And based on what Adrian Jones Alston and Priscilla Morris and Alan Hornblum and we came together and said, hey, we got to start moving on this. We got to demand justice. And the first step toward justice is getting an apology. More than just an apology, but you start with the apology. So reached out to all these entities. And I'm proud to say that the mayor of the city and county of Philadelphia, Jim Kenney, apologized in less than 24 hours. If you thought that the apology that Bill Clinton gave in 1997 for the Tuskegee experiment, what Mayor Jim Kenney did within 24 hours of our demand was even stronger. He gave an official and unconditional written apology. We also reached out to City Council. I'm also glad to say that City Council is about to issue its own apology. We're reaching out to the DA of Philadelphia, and we know because he's the most progressive elected official in Philadelphia history, none other than Larry Krasner. We know he'll do the right thing and issue an apology from his office. Then ultimately, we'll be reaching out to the president of the Court of Common Pleas and the president of Municipal Court to get their opinions. Why? Because they're the ones who put these folks in prison. They're the ones who set the bail so high that these people couldn't get out. And because they couldn't get out, they were locked up in jail and therefore experienced those 23 years, almost a quarter century of excruciating experimentation on the body and the mind. So we encourage folks to support us because, as I said, the apology is the first step in getting justice. We want more. So if anybody's interested in getting more information about the nearly quarter century experiment on these inmates and how do we get justice, you can reach me by emailing me at michaelcoard@gmail.com. That's MichaelCoard. Again, thank you, Roland. michaelcoard@gmail.com and say, hey, what's the next step in getting justice for the former inmates and their descendants in connection with this horrific body and mind nearly 25-year experiment from 1995 to 1974. The mayor has apologized. City council is about to apologize. We know the DA is going to apologize. We might have a fight with the courts, but we're ready for that fight. Get all these apologies and then decide what to do. Also, folks interested can call me at 215 or call my organization, ATTAC, ATAC, Avenging the Ancestors Coalition, 215-552-8751, 215-552-8751. I thank you all for tuning in. I certainly thank our producer for getting the information out to you. Folks, have a wonderful weekend, but most important, be safe. I'm out.